The dust of 3,000 years coated everything in the Nethril ruins. Dr. Carries Vaughn brushed her gloved hand across the stone tablet, revealing symbols that made her breath catch in her throat. She had spent 5 years excavating this site on the eastern continent of Thessera, and in all that time, nothing had prepared her for this discovery. "Impossible," she whispered, her translation device flickering as it struggled with the archaic dialect. "This can't be right." Her assistant, a young Thesseran named Malvik, scrambled down the excavation ladder. "Dr. Vaughn, what did you find?" Carrie stepped back, letting her headlamp illuminate the full tablet. The symbols glowed faintly in the light, as if they had been waiting all this time to be read. "It's a warning. Or maybe a promise. The translation matrix keeps giving me conflicting readings, but the core message is clear." She pointed to a repeating glyph that appeared 17 times across the stone surface. This symbol appears in the myths of 43 different species across the outer spiral. Species that never had contact with each other, separated by thousands of light years and millions of years of history. "What does it mean?" Malvik asked, leaning closer. "The Silent Ones." Carries felt a shiver run down her spine despite the warm underground air. Every dead civilization we've studied has some reference to them. Beings who walked among the stars when the galaxy was young. Beings who vanished by choice, not conquest. And according to this tablet, beings who promised to return. Malvik's face showed polite skepticism. The younger generation of Thesserans had little patience for ancient superstitions. "Doctor, with respect, these sound like fairy tales. Every culture creates myths about powerful protectors. It's basic sociology." "I thought so too," Carries admitted, photographing the tablet from multiple angles. "Until I started finding the pattern. These aren't just stories, Malvik. They're too specific, too consistent. And they all mention the same thing. When darkness returns to consume the minds of the free, the Silent Ones will answer the call." "Consume minds?" Malvik laughed nervously. "Now you're definitely describing mythology." Carries was about to respond when her communication device crackled to life. The voice of Professor Danthus, the expedition's director, came through with unusual urgency. "All personnel return to base camp immediately. We have a situation." The tone made Carries' stomach tighten. In 5 years she had never heard Danthus sound frightened. She and Malvik gathered their equipment and climbed out of the excavation shaft. As they emerged into the fading twilight, Carrie saw the entire camp gathered around the main communications array. The holographic display showed something that made her blood run cold. Ships. Hundreds of them, emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Thesseran system. But these were not like any vessels in the known galaxy. They were organic, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost alive. And they were massive, each one easily 3 times the size of Thessara's largest defense stations. "The Kryn Dominion," Professor Danthus said, his voice hollow. "We received the identification signal 10 minutes ago. They're broadcasting on all frequencies." Carries had heard whispers about the Kryn. Everyone had. They were the nightmare that hid at the edge of explored space, a hive-mind empire that had assimilated 17 species in the last century. But they had always stayed in the outer dark, far from established civilizations. Until now. "What do they want?" someone asked. The holographic display shifted, showing the translated message. The words appeared in perfect Thesseran, which was somehow worse than if they had come in an alien language. "Sentient species of Thessera. You have been selected for integration into the Kryn Collective. Resistance is biologically inadvisable. Your individual consciousness will be preserved as data within the greater whole. Compliance will begin in 72 hours. Those who submit willingly will experience minimal discomfort during the assimilation process." The camp erupted in chaos. People shouted questions, demanded answers, called for the defense forces. But Carrie stood frozen, staring at the message. "Consume the minds of the free." The words from the ancient tablet echoed in her head. She grabbed Professor Danthus by the arm. "The ruins. There's something in the ruins." "Carries, this is not the time for archaeology. Listen to me." She pulled up the photos of the tablet on her portable device. "Every species the Kryn have assimilated, I've studied their archaeology. They all had myths about the Silent Ones. And they all had ruins with markers like this one. Markers that were supposed to be activated when a threat came that could steal consciousness itself." Danthus looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You're talking about activating some kind of ancient beacon based on mythology?" "I'm talking about following instructions left by people who predicted exactly this situation 3,000 years ago." Carries was already moving toward the excavation site. "You saw the message. The Kryn don't destroy, they assimilate. They erase individuality. That's what the warning meant. Even if you're right, who would answer? Danthus called after her. The silent ones are legends. Metaphors. They probably represent some kind of philosophical ideal, not actual beings. But Carys was already climbing down into the excavation shaft. Malvik hesitated, then followed her. They reached the chamber with the tablet, and Carys began examining it with renewed urgency. There had to be more. The warnings wouldn't exist without instructions. There, Malvik said, pointing to a section of wall they hadn't fully excavated. Those markings continue. They worked frantically, brushing away millennia of accumulated sediment. As the last of the dust cleared, Carys saw what they had missed. Behind the warning tablet was a door, seamlessly integrated into the stone. And in the center of that door was an interface panel, its surface covered in the same symbols as the tablet. It's a lock, she breathed. Or maybe an activation mechanism. Her translation device hummed as it analyzed the symbols. The instructions appeared on her screen, step by step, surprisingly clear despite their age. Place hand here. Speak the words of calling. Wait for the answer that may never come. Dr. Vaughn, this is insane, Malvik said, his voice shaking. We don't know what this does. It could be a weapon, a trap, anything. Or it could be exactly what it claims to be, a way to call for help. Carys looked at her young assistant. The Kryn will be here in 3 days. Our defense fleet can't stop them. Nobody in the sector can. The Kryn don't lose, Malvik. They've been unstoppable for 100 years. So either we try this or we accept that in 72 hours, everything we are, every thought, every memory, every choice we've ever made becomes property of a hive mind. Malvik swallowed hard, then nodded. Do it. Carys placed her hand on the interface. The stone was cold, almost metallic. She spoke the words her translation device had provided, ancient syllables that felt strange on her tongue. For a moment nothing happened. Then the stone beneath her hand began to warm. Light spread from the interface, following channels carved into the walls that they hadn't even noticed before. The entire chamber illuminated, revealing a space far larger than they had realized. In the center of the chamber, rising from the floor, was a crystalline structure. It pulsed with internal light, growing brighter with each pulse. And then it began to sing, a frequency so low Carys felt it in her bones rather than heard it. What did you do? Malvik whispered, his eyes wide. I have no idea, Carys admitted. But something is happening. They climbed back to the surface to find the sky had changed. The Kryn ships were visible now, even in daylight, dark shapes that blotted out stars. But there was something else. At the edge of the system, their communication arrays detected something new. 3 energy signatures, completely unlike the Kryn vessels, moving at impossible speeds. Professor Danthus found Carys as she emerged from the excavation. What did you activate down there? Every archaeological site on the planet just lit up simultaneously. The energy readings are off the scale. I activated a beacon, Carys said, watching the sky. Or maybe I woke something up. I'm not sure there's a difference. The next 48 hours were chaos. The Thessaran government evacuated major cities. The defense fleet mobilized, knowing it was futile. And across the planet, ancient ruins that had been dormant for millennia suddenly came alive with light and sound. Scientists couldn't explain it. Religious leaders called it divine intervention. Politicians called it a distraction from the real threat. But Carys stayed at the excavation site, monitoring the beacon. The 3 unknown signatures had entered the system and were approaching Thessera. They moved with purpose but without aggression, their trajectory designed to avoid any possible misinterpretation as hostile. On the 3rd day, as the Kryn Dominion began their descent toward Thessara's atmosphere, the 3 unknown vessels arrived. Carys stood on the surface, surrounded by her colleagues and a growing crowd of Thessarans who had heard about the lights in the ruins. They all looked up as the vessels entered visual range. They were beautiful. That was Carys's first thought. The ships were crystalline like the beacon in the ruins, but impossibly large. They caught the light of Thessara's sun and refracted it into rainbows that painted the sky. They moved with grace that seemed organic, alive, as if they were swimming through space rather than flying through it. The Kryn ships paused in their descent. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered in what might have been confusion or concern. The 2 fleets faced each other in the space above Thessera, ancient enemies meeting for the first time in millennia. Then every communication device on the planet activated simultaneously. Radios, computers, personal communicators, even the old emergency broadcast systems that hadn't been used in decades. A voice spoke, clear and calm, speaking perfect Thessaran with an accent that sounded like it came from Carrie's own archaeological texts. "People of Thessara, we received your call. We apologize for our long silence. We are the ones your ancestors called the Silent Ones. We are the ones who walked among you before we chose to step back. We are humanity and we have not forgotten our promise. You are not alone. You will not be consumed. Your thoughts are your own now and always." Carries felt tears streaming down her face. Around her, Thessarans dropped to their knees, not in worship but in overwhelming relief. The myths were real. The legends had been true all along. Professor Danthus stood beside her, staring at the crystalline ships with an expression of wonder. "I was wrong," he whispered. "We were all wrong." "No," Carrie said, watching as the 3 human vessels positioned themselves between Thessara and the Kryn fleet. "We just forgot." But they didn't. They remembered. In the space above their world, humanity had returned. And the Kryn Dominion was about to learn why some myths should never be tested. The battle for Thessara was about to begin. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the bridge of the Remembrance, watching the Kryn fleet through the crystalline viewport. Around her, the bridge crew worked in quiet concentration, their hands moving across holographic interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. After 8 centuries of isolation, humanity had changed. They had evolved beyond simple warfare into something more deliberate, more precise. "Status report," she said, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. Lieutenant James Okoye looked up from his station. 27 Kryn vessels holding position 300,000 kilometers above Thessara. "They're not advancing, but they haven't retreated either. I think we surprised them." "Good," Sarah said. "Surprise gives us time. Open a channel to the Thessaran government. Let's see if we can coordinate a proper introduction before things get complicated." Within the hour, a transport shuttle carried Sarah and her diplomatic team down to Thessara's surface. They landed at the Nethral ruins, where Dr. Carries Vaughn waited with a mixture of hope and terror on her face. Sarah recognized that expression. She had seen it on a dozen worlds over the past year as humanity quietly returned to a galaxy that had forgotten them. Sarah stepped off the shuttle wearing simple clothes. No uniform, no armor, nothing that suggested military authority. Beside her walked Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's chief xenopsychologist, and engineer Amara Osei, who had spent her life studying the ancient beacons humanity had left scattered across the galaxy. Carries approached slowly as if afraid they might vanish like a dream. "You're really human? The legends called you the Silent Ones, but I never knew what that meant." "We're human," Sarah confirmed, extending her hand in the ancient gesture of peace. "And the name is appropriate. We went silent because we had to. 800 years ago, humanity was on a path to becoming exactly what the Kryn are now, a force that eliminated choice in the name of unity. We stopped ourselves before it was too late, but only barely. So we withdrew. We went silent. We chose to step back and let the galaxy develop without our interference." "But you left the beacons," Carrie said, touching Sarah's hand hesitantly as if testing whether she was solid. "We left markers," Amara explained, her voice gentle. "Instructions for species facing threats that we understood too well. Threats to consciousness itself, to the fundamental right to remain individuals. The Kryn are not the first hive-mind empire we've encountered, but they might be the most dangerous because they genuinely believe they're offering peace." Professor Danthus pushed forward through the crowd. "Can you stop them? The Kryn have assimilated 17 species. Their technology is beyond anything we understand." Marcus Webb smiled sadly. "Their technology is sophisticated, but it relies on one fundamental principle, neural harmonization. They synchronize brain waves, creating a unified consciousness. It's actually quite elegant, except for the minor problem that it destroys individuality." He paused, looking at the gathered Thessarans. "Humanity is immune." "Immune?" Carries' eyes widened. "How?" "Accident of evolution," Marcus explained. "Human neural architecture developed differently than most species. Our brains are chaotic, contradictory, almost aggressively individualistic. The Kryn technology reads us as static noise. They can't harmonize what refuses to harmonize." An alarm shrieked across the camp. The holographic displays showed the Kryn fleet moving, descending toward Thessara's atmosphere. The organic ships pulsed with increasing intensity, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to aggressive configurations. Sarah touched her communicator. "Remembrance, this is Chin. Initiate Protocol Sanctuary. All civilian populations are Priority 1. In orbit, the 3 crystalline human vessels began to move. But they didn't advance toward the Kryn. Instead, they positioned themselves directly above Thessara's major population centers, their hulls beginning to glow with soft, protective light. What are they doing? Malvik asked, staring at the display. Creating neural shields, Amara explained. The Kryn won't just attack with weapons. Their primary assault will be a planet-wide neural pulse designed to begin the assimilation process. Our ships are generating a counter-frequency that will protect everyone beneath them. The Kryn broadcast came suddenly, their translated message appearing on every screen. Unknown vessels, you interfere with collective business. Your presence is illogical. All consciousness eventually joins the whole. Resistance serves no purpose. Withdraw or be integrated. Sarah picked up the communication device, broadcasting her response so everyone on Thessara could hear. Kryn Collective, this is Commander Sarah Chin of Humanity. We do not interfere with your business. We protect those who wish to remain free. We offer you the same choice we offer everyone. Withdraw peacefully or learn why some species choose silence over supremacy. The Kryn response was immediate. Their ships released a wave of energy that swept across Thessara like invisible fire. On the ground, Thessarans cried out, clutching their heads. But the pain lasted only seconds before the human shields activated, dampening the neural assault. In the cities beneath the crystalline vessels, millions of people felt the attack brush against their minds like a whisper, then fade. But in the countryside, in small towns and isolated communities beyond the shield coverage, the effect was different. Carries watched in horror as the holographic displays showed people stopping mid-movement, their eyes going blank, their individual expressions melting into unified calm. No, she whispered. They're being taken. Remembrance, Sarah spoke urgently into her communicator. Extend shield radius. Secondary protocol, I need extraction teams in all unprotected zones immediately. James Okoye's voice came back tense. Commander, extending the shields that far will leave us vulnerable. The Kryn will target our ships directly. I know. Do it anyway. In space, the three human vessels expanded their protective fields, stretching their coverage across the entire planet. The strain showed immediately, their crystalline hulls began to fracture, light bleeding through the cracks. The Kryn fleet, sensing weakness, attacked. But the Kryn had never faced human military technology. Their organic weapons fired neural disruptors and consciousness-disrupting pulses, weapons designed to attack minds, not matter. The attacks washed over the human ships like water over stone. The crystalline hulls absorbed the energy, fractured further, but held. Sarah turned to Carries. I need your help. Those beacons your ancestors built, they're not just communication devices. They're neural amplifiers. If we can activate all of them simultaneously, we can extend our protection across the entire planet. How do I activate them? Carries asked, already moving toward the excavation. You already know, Amara said, following her. You did it once. Do it again, but this time think about everyone you want to protect. The beacons respond to intention as much as action. Carries descended into the ruins with Amara beside her. The crystalline structure still pulsed with light, brighter now, responding to the battle above. She placed her hands on its surface and closed her eyes. In her mind, she pictured every Thessaran she knew, every stranger in every city, every child who deserved to grow up with their own thoughts. The beacon exploded with light. Across Thessara, every ancient marker activated simultaneously, creating a network of protection that covered the entire world. The Kryn neural pulse broke against it like waves against a cliff. In orbit, the Kryn Collective made a choice. If neural assault wouldn't work, they would use physical force. Their ships changed configuration, organic hulls rippling as they formed weapon ports. Kinetic projectiles launched toward the human vessels. Lieutenant Okoye reported the incoming attack to Commander Chin. They've shifted to conventional weapons. Projectiles incoming. Impact in 40 seconds. Sarah made a decision that went against every military instinct. Do not return fire with lethal force. Target their propulsion systems only. Use electromagnetic pulse weapons. Sever their connection to the collective, but don't destroy them. Commander, they're trying to kill us, James protested. I know. Do it anyway. The human ships fired, but their weapons were unlike anything the Kryn had encountered. Instead of explosives or energy beams, they released precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. The pulses swept through the Kryn vessels, disrupting their organic neural networks, severing the connections that linked each ship to the greater collective consciousness. What happened next was something no one expected. The Kryn ships went dark, their bioluminescent patterns fading. But then, slowly they began to light up again, differently. The uniform patterns broke apart into individual, chaotic signals. On each ship, the Kryn drones who had been unified parts of the collective suddenly found themselves alone in their own minds for the first time in their existence. Panic followed. The Kryn ships broadcast desperate, confused messages. What is happening? Where is the whole? I am alone. I am alone. I. Marcus Webb's voice came through Sarah's communicator, filled with urgency and compassion. Commander, the Kryn we've freed are experiencing severe psychological trauma. They've never had individual consciousness before. They don't know how to process it. We need to help them immediately, or they'll self-destruct out of pure existential terror. Sarah looked at the tactical display. More Kryn ships were arriving from the outer system, the main collective fleet, coming to reinforce or destroy the vessels that had been severed from the whole. She had minutes, maybe less, to make a choice. All ships, new priority. The freed Kryn vessels are our primary concern now. Defensive formation around them. And get our psychological team ready. We're about to have a lot of very confused beings who need help understanding what individuality means. On the ground, Carries watched the display in disbelief. You're protecting them? The Kryn who just tried to assimilate us. We're protecting individuals who just discovered they're individuals, Sarah corrected gently. That's different. They didn't choose to be part of a hive mind, they were born into it. Now they have a choice, probably for the first time in their existence. We have to help them understand that choice, or we're no better than the collective that enslaved them. The main Kryn fleet arrived with overwhelming force. Hundreds of vessels, all connected to the collective, all moving with perfect coordination. They surrounded the human ships and the newly freed Kryn vessels, weapons charging. The collective broadcast a message. Corrupted units must be reintegrated or eliminated. Surrender them or all will be assimilated. Sarah opened a channel to the entire Kryn fleet, knowing the collective would hear every word. Kryn collective, we will not surrender these individuals. They are no longer your property. But we offer you something else, the chance to understand what you're destroying. Your assault on Thessera failed because consciousness cannot be forced into unity. It can only be shared through choice. What you call corruption we call freedom. What you call integration we call erasure. You believe you offer peace, but you offer only silence. Your words are meaningless. Unity is inevitable. Then prove it, Sarah said. We freed 12 of your ships. That's approximately 40,000 individual Kryn minds, all suddenly experiencing consciousness for themselves. If your way is superior, if unity is truly better, then they'll choose to rejoin you willingly. We won't stop them. But if we're right, if individual choice has value, then some of them will choose to stay free. Are you willing to risk that test? The collective went silent. For a full minute, no transmission came. The main fleet held position, weapons charged but not firing. Sarah held her breath, knowing she was gambling everything on the hope that somewhere in the vast interconnected consciousness of the Kryn, there was curiosity about the alternative. Finally, the response came, your test is accepted. 1 standard day. Corrupted units will be allowed to experience separation. After 1 day they will choose integration or be eliminated. The Kryn main fleet withdrew to a holding position. Sarah immediately mobilized every psychological specialist in the human fleet. Within hours, small shuttles were docking with the freed Kryn vessels, bringing not weapons but counselors, teachers, and philosophers. Carries volunteered to join one of the teams. She boarded a Kryn ship with Marcus Webb and found herself in a nightmare of confusion. The Kryn drones, tall, insectoid beings with compound eyes and chitinous exoskeletons huddled in corners, their mandibles clicking in distress. They spoke in fragments, unable to form coherent thoughts. Alone. What am I? Am I? Terror. Cannot think. Too many thoughts. Help us. Please. Make it stop. Marcus moved among them with infinite patience, speaking softly. You are individuals. You are separate beings with your own thoughts. This feels wrong because you've never experienced it before, but it's not wrong. It's natural. Every being you've assimilated felt this way, alone, unique, individual. You're not broken. You're just finally whole. One Kryn drone approached Carries, its compound eyes reflecting her image 1,000 times. What? Why separate us? The whole was peaceful. This is chaos. Was it peaceful? Carries asked gently. Or was it silent? Did you choose the whole or were you simply born into it? The Kryn drone's mandibles stopped clicking. In the silence, something like understanding began to form. I do not know. I have never known anything else. But now, I decide to move this limb. I choose these words. Is this Is this what you call freedom? Yes, Carrie said, tears in her eyes. That's exactly what it is. The day passed in a blur of counseling, teaching, and gentle guidance. By the time the deadline approached, something remarkable had happened. Of the 40,000 freed Kryn, almost 10,000 had chosen to remain individuals. They didn't fully understand it yet, but they understood enough to want to keep experiencing it. The collective returned as promised. Their broadcast was different this time, less certain, more questioning. The test has concluded. Results are unexpected. Corrupted units have chosen to remain separate. This outcome was not anticipated. Sarah responded immediately. Will you honor your agreement? Will you let them choose? Another long silence. Then, agreement will be honored. Separated units may remain separate. But the collective must understand. How do individuals function without unity? How do you make decisions without consensus? How do you find peace in chaos? That, Sarah said, is a much longer conversation. And if you're truly willing to learn, we're willing to teach. Not to convert you, not to force change, but to share perspective. The separated Kryn can help. They understand both ways of existing now. What followed was unprecedented in galactic history. The Kryn Collective, an empire that had assimilated 17 species, agreed to a dialogue. Not a surrender, not a treaty, but a genuine exchange of ideas. Human ships remained in the Thessaran system, protecting the planet and the newly freed Kryn. But they also sent teachers to the collective fleet, sharing philosophy, art, literature, everything that defined individual consciousness. Months passed. More Kryn chose separation, curious about this alternative way of existing. The collective didn't collapse, but it changed. It became voluntary. Drones could choose to join the whole or maintain individuality. Some moved between both states, experiencing unity when they wanted connection and separation when they wanted solitude. A year after the battle, Carrie stood in the rebuilt Nethril ruins with Commander Sarah Chin. The excavation had expanded into a proper research center, focused now on understanding the relationship between humanity and the species they had guided millennia ago. Why did you really withdraw? Carrie's asked. You said it was to avoid becoming conquerors, but I think there's more to it. Sarah smiled, looking up at the stars where human ships still kept watch. We withdrew because we learned something terrible about ourselves. We were too good at convincing others that our way was right. Species would change themselves to be more like us, would abandon their own cultures to adopt ours, all because we were charismatic and powerful and seemingly perfect. We weren't conquering through force, we were conquering through influence. And that was worse because people thanked us for it. So you left. We left. We went silent so the galaxy could develop its own answers, its own philosophies, its own paths. We only left the beacons for one specific threat, the threat to consciousness itself, because that we understood too well. We had almost become a different kind of hive mind, united not by neural links but by cultural dominance. And now you're back, Carrie said. Now we're back but different. We don't lead. We don't guide. We protect the right to choose and then we step back. The freed Kryn will develop their own path. Thessera will recover in its own way. And when the galaxy doesn't need protection anymore, we'll go silent again. Will you? Carrie's asked softly. Or will you stay this time? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. We're still learning. Still trying to balance protection with interference, help with control. But that's the point, isn't it? We don't have all the answers. We just have the commitment to keep asking the questions. High above Thessera, the crystalline human vessels continued their watch, catching starlight and refracting it into rainbows. They were scarred from battle, cracked from protecting a world that had called out in desperation. But they held position, patient and silent, guarding the choice that every being deserved, the choice to remain themselves. The myths had been real. The legends had been true. And in their return, humanity taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that real strength isn't the power to conquer or convert, but the wisdom to protect choice itself, even at great cost. The Kryn Collective continued to exist, but it was no longer an empire of forced unity. It was an experiment in coexistence, proof that even the most seemingly absolute forms of consciousness could learn, adapt, and respect the boundaries of others. And in the ancient ruins of Thessera, the beacons continued to pulse with soft light, waiting for the next call that might never come, standing as eternal reminders that somewhere among the stars, someone was listening. Someone who remembered. Someone who had learned that the greatest warriors are those who fight not to win, but to preserve the right of others to fight their own battles, make their own choices, and forge their own destinies. The silent ones had spoken. And the galaxy would never forget. The end.